It's a totally new era for Angelman syndrome, and I'm so excited for Jennifer to be able to really share with us the complication of how difficult making decisions are and how we can best serve our children. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Clicker. Okay, so here are my disclosures. I am co-director of ABOM, and I work for Transformatics, as Allison said, and I actually have a presentation tomorrow updating you on our gene therapy program. So about me, I have been in biotech for about 24 years, and I have filed a lot of applications for clinical trials. So that's why I'm here to talk to you. I've done a few of these things. And for those trials that were successful, I've also filed applications to get those drugs approved globally. So I've done a lot of the paperwork. I like to tell my kids my job is really about paperwork. But it's really been in regulatory, and that's sort of the interface between a company and global health authorities like FDA, the groups that review clinical trial applications. But most importantly, there we go. My family is affected by Angelman syndrome. This is my niece, Samantha, who lives with Angelman syndrome, and her mom, Siobhan, who is director of Angelman Academy. So please visit her table while you're here. And Samantha's a big fan of Santa, so that's why I'm wearing that hat. The views I'm going to express are my own. I'm giving you my own opinions, really more from the patient side, from my family side, based on my experience with clinical trials. So it's not the company view, and I'm not talking about anybody's study design for any of the clinical trials that are ongoing at this time. It's really just about considerations you may have when you think about trials. And it's about trials today and trials in the future. So as we progress, which is super exciting, so there are multiple clinical trials ongoing right now for Angelman syndrome, and hopefully in the future that's going to continue to grow, and there'll be more early stage and more late stage trials, and so you'll have different considerations. So we're going to start at the top with the basics, which is what's a clinical trial. And there are different types of studies. There are observational studies, which is basically where you enroll a subject and they get observed, but there's no intervention, there's no drug. And that's what the natural history study is. And that's really also an important part of research because it helps inform us about the disorder and about measures we might use to study it. And then there are interventional studies, and that's what a clinical trial is. That's what we're talking about, when they assign a participant to an intervention like a drug or a device that's being evaluated to see if it's safe and if it works. And trials have phases. I think you all have heard about the phases. And so really that's just a progression of the research over time. So we start at one point where we try to learn, is it safe? And then we progress through stages to understand how it works, and we look at more and more people. And so phase one generally is about safety. And I'm going to say generally a lot today because there's always exceptions to every rule, but what I'm giving you is sort of the general framework of how these things work. So phase one is often the first time that the drug is in humans, and they also call these first-in-human studies. And it's usually a small number of participants, and you're looking at safety to understand what's a safe dose and is this safe for patients. And when you learn from that, you might progress into phase two, where you now look at, does it work? Does it do something in the body? Does it do what I hope it does to treat this condition? And is it still safe when I do that? And you enroll more participants at that stage. And then phase three is really about, okay, now I've learned that it's safe at a certain dose level, it's safe in certain patients, it seems to work in certain patients, and now I'm going to confirm all those effects in a really big and robust study so that I can try to get the drug approved. In rare disease, these phases are blended. Oftentimes, they overlap. So you might see, I think all of the oligonucleotide studies that are ongoing are phase 1-2. And that means they're looking at safety and at efficacy, at early efficacy measures. And in rare disease, these phases overlap because there aren't as many patients. And so you're trying to do a lot with a little. You're trying to progress and learn, and you don't have as many patients to study. And also, there are unmet medical needs. So obviously, there's no approved therapy for Angelman syndrome. So you're trying to progress and learn quickly in the hopes that you can get drugs to patients faster. There's also phase 4, so there's post-approval. And that's when you have a situation oftentimes where maybe you study a small segment of patients and the drug seems to work really well and it seems to be safe, and so there's benefit in putting it out there for patients to have access to it, and you might do additional studies to learn more about it once it's on the market. and it expands what's called the label, and that's the prescribing information of a drug. And so if you've ever gone to a pharmacy and they actually give you something that comes in its original packaging, and you pull out that little sheet of paper that's all folded up that has all of that, or all this information on it about how it works, that's the labeling or the prescribing information. And so that can get expanded over time when you learn more about the drug, and sometimes that happens after something's already approved. Thinking about early phase studies, because a lot of the research that's going on right now in Angelman syndrome is early, or phase 1, or phase 1-2, as I said. A lot of these trials are exploring dose, and they start by assigning groups of participants to cohorts to look at a staged approach to dosing. And so they might start at a low dose and see if it's safe in a small number of patients. And then if that looks good, they go to a next cohort where they increase the dose and they look at more patients, and that keeps progressing up to a high level. Sometimes you don't get all the way up to the dose that you thought you'd go to because it's not well tolerated in patients, but generally this is what it is. It's sort of an incremental approach to exploring the dose and making sure you have safety with those dose levels. And so it's an ascending dose evaluation because it goes up with each cohort, and sometimes these are single doses, like in a gene therapy study you would only get one dose. Or sometimes it's multiple doses. If the drug is going to be administered more than once, you might have multiple ascending doses. And sometimes you'll hear the industry people call it a SAD or a MAD, and that's single ascending dose, multiple ascending dose. Questions to ask. So if you're thinking about an early stage trial, and it doesn't have to be today, it could be in the future, there'll be other studies that come along. Things to ask about that kind of a design when you talk to the study investigator is, what dose group is enrolling? Is it the first dose group? Is it the second dose group? These are things that you'd like to understand. Because if it's not the first dose group, they probably know a little bit about the safety in the earliest participants. So if it's the second or the third, you might ask, well, how have your other patients that are in earlier groups done? What was their safety like? Did they have any side effects? These are things that you can ask and have conversations about when you consider trials. Let's talk about controls. Most of the studies right now in Angelman syndrome are open label, meaning that everybody is on the drug and there's no control group. There's no comparator group that you're enrolling in the study to assess effects against the active drug. And there are different types of controls. These are not all the controls that exist. I'm just giving you some. There are all kinds of study designs. But things that you might hear about are obviously placebo-controlled studies, and that's a dummy arm. Basically, there's no active drug in that. There could be an active control group, so maybe in the future there will be multiple approved drugs for Angelman syndrome, and there could be additional studies that compare a new drug to an approved drug, and that's active control. There could be sham, and sham is just what it sounds like. It's a pretend. They make you think that you've had a procedure performed, but really there's no procedure that's been performed, and that's to sort of make you question whether you got the drug or not. And then there's historical controlled, and this means it's an external control group, so it's external to the study. Sham, placebo, and active are internal to the study, meaning they're groups that are on the study at the same time as the group getting the drug for comparative purposes. Historical control is a group of patients that are not in the study, and you reference results against that group. So the natural history study, for example, you might take participants that were in that study that contributed data about Angelman syndrome and compare them to a group that's getting a study drug. Generally, if you're in a study that has a control group that's internal to the study, like a placebo or a sham, it's also blinded, meaning you don't know what you're getting, and neither the participant or the doctor usually knows what you're assigned to, so that's a double blind. Why do we use certain controls? Well, a placebo, generally they decide to use a placebo if they feel it's ethical to give a patient nothing. And this is, sometimes I struggle with this, but when there are diseases where there's no treatment, sometimes it is actually considered ethical to give a placebo. And I'm saying this from the regulatory perspective, not the personal perspective, but sometimes the regulators feel that if a patient actually doesn't have a treatment option anyways, you could study an active drug versus a placebo because they would otherwise not have access to a treatment for their disorder. And regulators like placebos, unfortunately. Shams sometimes you would give if the administration procedure is complicated, and gene therapy could be considered that. There are actually studies now, not in Angelman syndrome, of gene therapies where there is a group that is actually getting the gene therapy administered to their brain, and there's a sham group where they make the participant think that they've gone through the procedure to have it administered to their brain, but they've actually not given them anything at all. And historical controlled studies usually you give when it's unethical to withhold any treatment, and these are actually not really that common. I actually worked on a historically controlled study for a disorder called Pompe disease, which is a life-threatening condition in infants. At the time of that study, it was considered unethical because it was known that those children were going to die probably before their second birthday. And so it was felt that we should take every effort to enroll them into the active arm in the hopes that it would have benefit. So usually historical is when it's really unethical to give somebody a control or a placebo. Why do we need controls? Really, it's considered in research a gold standard. It helps to compare the group that gets the drug to a group that doesn't, so you understand the safety and you understand the effects. It makes the effects sometimes more clear, especially if the disease isn't predictable, right? If you don't know how the disease group is going to behave, or you don't know, every patient is very different in terms of how they present and how they are on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes a control group that doesn't get anything helps you understand those effects more clearly. You can imagine too that when you have endpoints, and Allison talked a lot about endpoints in the ABOM talk, so those are sort of the outcome measures that we look at. If we're looking at a rating scale that's assessed by a bunch of different doctors in the study, or you have patient reports, so a patient reports to you how they're feeling. I feel pain today. Well, how is your pain? Those are subjective assessments, and sometimes it's not so easy to tell if you are feeling better or not, because we are biased. And so, I don't mean we're all biased, but sometimes when you go into a study, there's bias, meaning that you come into the study with a preconceived notion of how you're going to do. Like, I'm going to get drugs, so I'm going to feel awesome. And that can bias the results of the study. It can influence the outcome because we might think we're doing better when in fact we're not really doing better at all. We just think that because we feel happy that we're getting the study drug, or we're happy to have better care at the treatment site. So that helps us. And if you look at this pain rating scale at the bottom here, if I went into a site and I was in a pain trial and the investigator asked me, how are you feeling? Is your pain better? And I say, so-so. Is that the yellow circle or is that the blue circle? It's subjective, and so it matters. So that's why sometimes we have to use controls to help us discern, is something working or not? Is something safe or not? This is an example of a rare disease trial that uses a control, and they are used in rare disease trials. This is a drug called Erisdi that is for patients with spinal muscular atrophy. And in it, they were assessing in children whether or not they had a response to treatment on a motor assessment scale. And you can see the blue group here, the top group, is the treatment group that got drug, and the gray group got placebo. And at the end of the trial, at month 12, you can see there's clearly a difference between the blue and the gray, and that drug was approved. But look here at month 8, you can see the group in gray is going up, but they weren't getting drugs. So why was their motor score getting better over time? It could be variability in the assessment. It could be variability in the disease. So that's why having a control helps us understand when there are changes in just sort of day-to-day in the disorder, if you clearly have an effect. The other thing I want to call your attention to here is that the number of patients that were in the treatment group is twice as many than were on placebo. So sometimes we don't always put equal numbers on treatment and placebo. Sometimes we put more on treatment. And this is because companies know that nobody really wants to be in the placebo group. So sometimes we try to do this to minimize the number of patients that have to get placebo. So that's something important for you to understand about a study design is, if it's controlled, how many patients are actually going to be on placebo? What's my chance that I'm going to get active drug? Or what's my child's chance? Another word about bias, which is sort of bringing these notions into the study that can impact the study results, is social media can influence bias as well. And I am a big user of social media. I love it. I think it's great. It's a great way for us to connect as a global community. I know it's been instrumental in bringing people together. It helps us share experiences. We learn from each other. We get support from each other. It has so many wonderful benefits. But in the context of a clinical trial, it can actually be negative at times and influence results. And so that's why we really, as companies, don't want people to talk about their experience in a trial specifically while they're in it, because it can influence others. And this is a story I'm showing you that was in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago that was talking about how researchers were worried about social media's influence and potential bias on the interpretability of results. And that means, I don't know if I can trust these results because it might have been influenced by what's happening outside of the trial. And I'm showing you here a report from a medical ethicist who did an analysis of social media on studies. And these are 2 examples of actual posts from participants in trials, not studies of Angelman syndrome, but other studies, where they were communicating with other participants or potential participants about study design. And in the top one, basically someone says, hey, I want to get into this study because I didn't do well on the drug that I'm taking now. Can you tell me how to get into this study? I'd drive anywhere, I'd go anywhere, travel anywhere to get in this study. And someone responds and says, oh yeah, you can get in this study, but don't tell them that you're on that drug and that you're not doing well, because you have to be on that drug while you're in this study. And that's basically not good, because that means you're going around the eligibility criteria and withholding information about how you're doing on something else to get into a trial. That's not good. Eligibility criteria, I'm going to come to in a minute, are meant to protect patients. They're meant to keep patients safe. So you really don't want to coach other people about how to game the system, because if you don't know about their medical particulars, it could be bad for them. And in this case, this patient might go into the study, they stay on a drug that makes them feel really badly, they might have to drop out of the study, they might take something that makes them feel sick. We really don't want that to happen. In the second example, this is even more concerning from a regulatory perspective. Someone's saying, hey, this drug that I'm on in this trial is great, it has very little side effects. If you have any side effects, it's going to be from this other drug that you have to take while you're in the study. And that's also not good, because we definitely do not want patients to not tell us about adverse events. It's really important, if the drug is not safe, that we know about it and we learn about it. And we don't want people to think, oh yeah, the investigational drug that's in this study is totally safe and that's not what's causing me problems, so I'm not going to tell my doctor about it. So those are the unintended consequences of social media, and why it's really important that you don't talk about your experience. It's okay to talk to people who are in the trial, but we don't want to sort of influence the choices that other people make by using social media in that way, because it may not be safe for them. Another word about control groups. Basically, it's really important for you to understand, as part of your considerations, is there a control group? How many people are going to be in it? How long, if I get assigned to the control group, or my child gets assigned to the control group, do I have to be in that control group? If I'm on placebo, how long is that going to be? Is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 12 months? Is it going to be a year? And then what happens after that study is over? Can I get on active drug? If I find out I was on placebo, can I be on the active drug? And when can I get that? And when will you tell me I've been on placebo? So, especially in rare disease, we try really, really hard to make trials seamless, meaning that you can go from one right into the next. And that's because if the drug is working and there's no treatment options, we don't want patients to have to come off of that drug. We want them to continue on it. But sometimes, for whatever reason, you may be at a study site where they're not ready to start the next study, and so it's not seamless. So it's really important that you understand, like, how long do I have to be? What's the longest I'm going to be without drug if I'm in the placebo arm? These are questions that you want to ask and understand when you talk to study investigators. Informed consent is another critical aspect of being in a clinical trial. It is basically the process of you being fully informed about what the research entails and what the risks are. And what it has to cover, this is basically where the study team is going to sit down and tell you, okay, this is all about this study and what you need to consider. And it has to tell you that the trial involves research and what that research is. What is the purpose? This study is about safety, or this study is about efficacy and safety. How long is the study going to last, and what is involved in the study? It's going to be 1 year, and you have to come in for 2 MRI and 3 X-ray and 5 blood draws and 10 visits. My daughter actually has peanut allergy, and I was approached about a study for her, and they said it's going to be 20 study visits in 6 months. And I said, whoa, that's too much. I can't, that's a lot. So you need to know all of the particulars about what's involved. What are the risks? This is a key piece. What are the risks of this drug? What are the benefits? If this drug has already been studied in phase 1 and phase 2 and they know something about how it works, you should be told what was the clinical experience in prior patients. What alternatives do you have? Are there other drugs you could take? Are there other things you could do? They have to tell you that. How your confidentiality is going to be protected and who gets to see your medical records. Whether you will be compensated. So basically, if you have to travel to the study site, are they going to reimburse you for gas? Are they going to reimburse you for hotel? Are you going to get a stipend? All of that needs to be explained up front. Who to contact if you have questions. This is really critical. They should give you the name, the phone number, the email of who to call, who to ask questions, and who to contact if you're injured. If you have an adverse event, you should know who to call right away. And most importantly, that you can withdraw at any time without any penalty. Nobody can take away any right from you. You can drop out whenever you want, and there should be no consequences to your clinical care. That's really important. About risks, phase 1 is early stage, and so when they're consenting you and they're telling you about the risks, it's usually based on what they've learned in animals, and we really try very, very hard to understand what safety signals come out of animal studies, but it is not perfect. So what we learn, we try to carry forward, but it may not predict everything. So it's important to understand that phase 1, there's less known about the drug. Sometimes when they're studying a class of drug, like oligonucleotides can be considered a class because there's other drugs that are similar and they're approved. So sometimes we think about, okay, the safety of this class of drugs involves these kind of events. And so we might tell you, well, we don't really know what the safety of this drug is, but other drugs that are like it have these problems. Late stage, it should have already been studied in a bunch of patients. So there's experience, there's clinical experience from trials, and that safety data should be included in the consent form, and you should ask about it. You should feel free to ask the study investigator any questions that you have about safety in prior groups. How to enroll, this is a question you get a lot. To enroll, you have to meet the eligibility criteria, and I mentioned that before. This means there's a list of criteria that says to be included, you have to meet these criteria. If you have these things or symptoms or other issues, you cannot be included in this study. This is to protect patients. Eligibility criteria is really about protecting patient safety. Firstly, it's about protecting patients. So if you have other conditions or disorders, it may not be safe for you to take that drug. So that's why it's really critical. And meeting the eligibility criteria is really, from a regulatory perspective, so critical. And putting patients in that don't meet it is a big problem. A second part of eligibility criteria is often the study design, especially in late stage, is intended to have patients in whom you can see an effect. So I'll give you an example. If we were looking at a study of a sleep drug and we wanted to make sure that it helped improve sleep, if a patient went to the investigator and said, I have all kinds of sleep problems, but you actually have no problem with sleep at all, you just want to get in the study because you hope it has other benefits for you, and they're measuring whether that drug has an effect on sleep, but you have no problems in sleep, you're not going to contribute to the effect data. They're not going to see a change in you if you have no problems at the start, because the drug isn't changing anything. So part of selecting patients in late stage studies is both for safety reasons and also because they're trying to find patients in who they can measure a change. Also about enrollment, the company does not enroll you in the trial. An investigator, a doctor, enrolls you in a trial. A doctor decides whether you have the right yeses and nos on the eligibility criteria. They make sure that you meet the criteria and enroll you. It is not up to a company to enroll you in a trial. You can go to a company website or you can call their patient advocacy or email them to find out about the trial. But if you call their patient advocacy, they're not going to say, oh yeah, you're a perfect candidate for the clinical trial. I just snapshotted something from a Pfizer website because I know they're not in Angelman syndrome. Basically, I went to their website to say, okay, what clinical trials do you have? And you can see, okay, well, we have a clinical trial for muscular dystrophy. These are the basic criteria. If you want to learn more about it, call our patient advocacy or email us. All of the companies have great patient advocacy staff, and they're there to help you. That's your liaison to the company to tell you information. They can provide information about where there are sites, what are basics about the trial, but they don't enroll you. It's really the study doctor who determines whether you can be in the study. In terms of information, you all know about clinicaltrials.gov, but I want to point you to this. NIH, which is the government agency that runs clinicaltrials.gov, has funded a new site that they're beta testing. If you click on that link there, this exciting new, more user-friendly format that's supposed to provide a little bit more information for participants on studies. So they're going to keep both sites going in parallel, but you can use that link to access the new beta site that's a little bit better for searching. And I looked at the natural history study for Angelman syndrome, and I saw right away it was easy to see that it's recruiting and where all the sites are and who to contact. So I said, okay, there's the phone number of Dr. Dewis if I want to find out more about this study. And you can see on the right-hand side the map with little icons pointing to where the study centers are. So this is still a really good resource in the United States to find out about clinical trials. There's also ex-US sites for the global community. The European Medicines Agency has a trial site. It's not the best, I have to say, but it's still a resource. You can find out about trials there. Health Canada has a trial site. And then, of course, advocacy organizations. ASF has a part on their website that details clinical trial information and contacts. There are general advocacy organizations like Global Genes, you heard Craig Martin present this morning. They have information about trials, and then there are other just sort of umbrella organizations where you can search up information on clinical trials. And so the million-dollar question, should I enroll in the trial? I'm saying this in sort of not the general sense and theoretically, should I enroll my child in a clinical trial, but if you are really considering a specific clinical trial for your child, today or tomorrow, what comes in the future, this is not a question that companies should answer, in my personal opinion. I don't think advocacy organizations should answer this question for you. This is a question for you and your doctor, and really the study doctor that knows the most about the study. It's a medical question. It's a question about your family's risk tolerance, whether you think you can meet the conditions of the study, and really whether the doctor thinks it's the best thing for you and your child. It's really not something, I know we get this a lot in terms of, oh, should I enroll in this person's study or that person's study? You really have to talk to the study doctor, and I know there are a lot of the study physicians or principal investigators, they're called, are amazing, caring individuals and are available to ask questions. You can find their information on clinicaltrials.gov, or if you call the patient advocacy groups of the different companies that are recruiting for trials, they can put you in touch with this, with the study contact team. And that's really the right group to ask this question. But most importantly, give yourself the time to think about it and ask all the questions that you want to ask, because it's really important that you have all this information before you make this decision. And I'll end there, and these are a few other resources that are available if you want to just research about clinical trials. Thanks.